My name is Hadone, and I'm an HR consultant. I work at Scale HR with Jeff. And then we also have here, no, and then I'm calling from Toronto. And I'm joined by Sydney. And Sydney is an HR consultant and an accessibility and neurodiversity consultant committed to removing physical and non-physical barriers in the workplace so that everyone can tap into their full talents and their full potential. And Sydney, where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Brampton.
Okay, yeah, so we're not very far from each other either. And I see in the chat here, we're quite diverse. Some Brampton representation. You have some West Coast in Victoria. I'm glad it's sunny for you. I mean, it's sunny here too, but it's also very snowy.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of snow, but sun, but snow.
Right, and snow. And from the chilly beaches of Toronto. Great. So I will give maybe just a couple more seconds for those who haven't had a chance to fill the poll. And your answers are anonymous, by the way. So yes, no.
We just want to know your thoughts. See where you are with understanding neurodiversity.
All right, so I'll close the poll now. Awesome. And then you can see the results there. So it seems to be like 70 to 30% split. And let me just pull up our slides.
Mm-hmm. So it's awesome that most of you have heard of neurodiversity. A lot of, I think before COVID, and a lot of people don't fully understand neurodiversity. So I'm very glad that most of you have heard of neurodiversity. So we're going to talk a bit more about that today.
All right, Sydney, I'll let you take it away. All right.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction, Hadone. So you want to foster inclusive culture for employees with disabilities and neurodivergent employees. That is awesome. I'm so glad you're here today. It's so important that you're here and want to learn more about how to be accessible and be inclusive to neurodivergent and disabled employees. So as an HR professional who's also actively involved in the disability and neurodivergent space, I'm so happy you're here. And it's very important that you're here and taking that step towards understanding how to more foster inclusive culture for all your employees to feel included with a focus on neurodivergent and disabled employees. So our agenda for today, where we're going to go over a definition of important terms that you need to know when fostering inclusive culture, the traits of an inclusive leader, some strategies to implement, and being an ally is being a leader, and then have a Q&A session where you guys can really ask questions and we can have an open dialogue. So before we get started into the definition of important terms, I'm interested to know what disabilities or both physical and neurodivergent disabilities you guys think might exist in the workplace. So feel free to put it in the chat, and then we can have a discussion. So what are some disabilities and neurodivergent disabilities that you've heard of that might exist in your workplace that you might have to accommodate for or just see in the workplace? Awesome. ADHD, autism, abstract thinking, anxiety, severe anxiety, learning disabilities. I'll give it one more second. See if there's anything else. Dyslexia. Yeah. So you guys listed a lot of the neurodivergent disabilities, which is awesome. So autism, ADHD, dyslexia. Anxiety is more of a mental health disability, but it still impacts your brain and how you interact. So now we're going to talk about the traits. I don't know if you can bring up that slide, please. First, we're going to talk about the definition of important terms. So it's important to have an understanding of these are a couple terms that you have to be acquainted with if you want to make an inclusive culture. So first but not least is inclusion. So inclusion, what is inclusion? Inclusion is more specifically the policies and procedures an organization implements to integrate everyone into the workplace. So it's making sure everyone feels included, and your policies and procedures should reflect this in the workplace. Accessible means having a person with a disability is afforded the opportunity to acquire the same information and the same resources. So a lot of people, when they think of accessibility, They think things have to be different and things have to change. And being more accessible means making sure that everyone has access to the information in the way they need the information. So, for example, if you have a PDF document, making sure that everyone can access it. So, for example, someone that's blind has to look at images through alt text, so it goes through a screen reader and it reads out the description of what's on the PDF. So, what is corporate culture? So, in order to fully understand how to become more inclusive culture and foster that inclusive culture, you have to understand what corporate culture is. Corporate culture refers to the beliefs and behaviors that determine how a company's employees and management interact. So it's how your day-to-day operations go, your core beliefs, your values as an organization, and what you really foster as an organization. Leadership in business is the capacity of a company's management set to achieve challenging goals and take fast and decisive action when needed, and making sure you inspire your employees to do the best and outperform and do the best performance. So leadership really is all about making sure you motivate your employees and making sure they feel motivated to do the best work at work and understand that they add value to the team. So next, what are some traits? So next poll, we're going to do next poll. What do you consider to be the most important leadership trait to be? There's no right or wrong answer. I'm just curious to know what you think an inclusive leader, what trait you think they should have. So I'll give you guys a couple seconds to fill out the poll, and then we'll look at the findings. Sam says empathy, that goes hand in hand with emotional intelligence. I'll give you one more second. Okay, let's look at the results. So the majority of you said emotional intelligence is the most important leadership trait. I do agree. I think emotional intelligence is very important, especially when you're being an inclusive leader, and the empathy aspect and being empathetic to everyone's experiences. So I'll go into more detail now. So an inclusive leader should be committed to change. This is because they have to articulate authentic commitment to diversity, challenge the status quo, hold others accountable, and make diversity and inclusion a personal priority. And they also understand that with becoming an inclusive leader and being an inclusive leader, that things change at a rapid rate, especially right now. We're changing from hybrid to remote work to on-site. So everything's changing so fast with all the different restrictions of COVID. It's important to be committed to the change and committed to the process, even as these changes occur. Emotional intelligence, having a high emotional intelligence is very important if you want to be an inclusive leader. This is very important in fostering inclusion and inclusive work environments. A leader needs to be able to see and understand different perspectives to truly be inclusive. It's important to recognize your own privilege, and then also understanding that your lived experience isn't everyone's lived experience. Everyone has different lived experiences that are so different from your own, and it's important to value their experience as much as your own and move forward in that. Respectfulness and fairness. The first step to combating bias and discrimination is recognizing and identifying it. Leaders must be aware of the unconscious bias they may hold towards someone that's neurodivergent or is disabled, and understanding that they do carry the level of bias with them. As a leader and an HR professional, we like to think we don't have any biases, but we're still only human, and we have an unintentional bias in our head that was formed over time. It's important not being denial that you have a bias. It's okay to have a bias. We're all human, but understanding how to break out of that bias and how to overcome those biases. From there, a leader needs to evaluate those biases and how they impact how they interact with the individuals in the workplace, and if they're favoring people that are not neurodivergent and disabled over those that are. It's important to take steps towards this and respectfully and fairly interact with all your employees and all your individuals in your workplace every day, and foster fairness and respectfulness in everything you do in all your job duties. So also, do not police culture. So allow people to be authentic in the workplace. This goes hand with being fair and respectful. Be respectful of everyone's differences. Everyone's differences makes them unique and adds strength to the organization. Also work to eliminate any blind spots in processes or practices that you have that in decision making and their policies and your procedures to make sure it's fair and even and everyone has equal opportunities in the workplace. It's important that leaders and inclusive leaders are curious, because different ideas and experiences enable growth. If you're not curious and if you keep with the same ideas, it's going to hinder your growth. Inclusive leaders demonstrate an open mindset and deep curiosity about others from a place without judgment. They listen without judgment, and they seek empathy to understand those around them. Inclusive leaders are also collaborators. It's important that good leaders listen to their team and listen to their followers. They don't make decisions on their own. They listen to all the voices to make a collective effort to make sure that everything's collaborative and everything's more diverse and inclusive. If you work in teams, less heard voices will be amplified and their ideas will be shared. This is also important to combat bias. It's because for more people in the room, it allows for more opportunities and more in-depth conversations of people with diverse backgrounds and diverse lived experiences. Especially if you're talking about diversity efforts, it's important, as an HR leader, it's important to listen to your neurodivergent and disabled employees, because they have the lived experience and you have to listen to what they want in the workplace. Yes, you can attend webinars and resources. There's so many great resources out there right now, but really listen to your employees and what they're saying they need for the organization. Because if you go to other webinars, sometimes it's hard to apply it directly to your company because they have a different lived experience than you. But ask the employees at the company, what they think about the organization. Also, an inclusive leader brings more of themselves to the workplace. So inclusive leaders take a stance of confidence and optimism, and also understand that they have to be authentic to allow other people in the workplace to be authentic. How can they expect someone to be authentic and be transparent that they're disabled or neurodivergent and disclose that to a leader if then the leader themselves can't bring all themselves to work? An inclusive leader also uses their voice as well as listen to other voices. So an inclusive leader, for example, if an employee comes up to you and says a suggestion or an idea, if they want it to be confidential, say this was brought to my attention, and then make that change. So that's a way to be confidential, but still give the person credit and not take credit for what was said to you. But if the person wants credit and wants their ideas and wants the team to know that it was their idea, but they want you to share it instead of them, still give them the credit they deserve. So next I'm going to talk about strategies and how to implement strategies into the workplace. So before I do that, I want you guys to leave in the chat. Do you think it's harder or easier to implement strategies into the workplace to become a more inclusive leader now with remote and hybrid work? So would it be easier to implement strategies in a remote setting or in a hybrid setting or an on-site? Where is it easier to implement strategies that can be spread across the organization to implement these changes? Is it easier or harder? Christopher says harder online, easier on-site. Not sure. Not sure. equally hard in all settings, depends on the organization or culture. Yep. There's pros and cons to both in-person and remote addressing of these and implementing strategies. So in some ways, right now with online work and remote work, it's more accessible and more inclusive, and more people can balance not just neurodivergent and disabled employees, but all employees. They find it easier to go to work from home because they don't have to do the long commutes and all these things. But it's important to implement these strategies in any way you can. So some strategies you can do include asking questions. So asking questions you can do in both remote work, hybrid work, or on-site. It doesn't matter where you are, you can ask questions to and be curious about other people's experiences in the workplace. Ask them for a one-on-one conversation to learn more about what they do and how they experience the organization. Everyone experiences the organization differently. Everyone has a different, everyone, because they might be through the lens of a new grad that's just coming to the organization and they want to just learn all the things. Someone that's been there for a long time, they have that different experience. And understanding what barriers there are to individuals with disabilities and neurodivergent individuals. Invite employees for all backgrounds to meetings. So make sure you include everyone in the conversation and ask them for their thoughts and suggestions during the meeting. So sometimes employees feel like they can't share their ideas and that their ideas don't matter, but it's important to invite these employees to the meetings and make sure that, and then also you can't just, it's not just enough to invite them to the meeting. It's important to actually engage them and consider how many employees have a varied experience that may have gained from different experiences, not just own work experiences, but life experiences with the family members or in school environments. Everyone has a unique perspective and unique experiences. And sometimes, especially with neurodivergent and disabled people, sometimes they feel like they can't speak up or they're in the minority. So make sure you foster that environment where you ask them questions. That goes back to the first one. You ask them questions that allows them to feel like they can speak their mind and speak about how they really truly feel and bring their ideas forward. Also be authentic when you invite them to the meeting. This is very important because we try to make meetings more diverse and have more perspectives, but don't just invite them to the meeting because you want to appear more diverse, but actually because you want to become more diverse. And also really listen to them when they share ideas, because if you don't listen to them and after inviting them to the meeting, that's just going to have a negative effect because they're going to feel like you can't share with them. They can't share with you, and that their ideas actually don't matter. That you just did it to make yourself look good. But it's important if you can't. So say, for example, an employee has an idea to fix a process or a hiring practice. Make sure that you listen to the idea. And if you can't, sometimes a lot of people also, they like automatic results. And so, but if you can't implement that idea they had or that process they had an idea for or that change, make sure you communicate that with them. And also, if you're in a on-site and there might be any barrier or any online barriers, so make sure you remove any barriers that they have to the meetings. This can include if, for example, they need to have the camera off because their eyes. Sometimes I have sensitivity with my eyes, and so I'm gonna still want to still be in the meeting, but I can't have my camera on that time because my eyes are feeling more sensitive that day. There's lots of other, but that's one example. Or if you're in the office and you're on site, making sure that if you have a employee that uses a wheelchair, that the space is accommodating and accessible for them to come in and out of. Next, consult with people outside your own circle. Surround yourself with people that are different from you. When seeking different perspectives, ask colleagues to recommend ask colleagues who they might have a new perspective. A diverse team works smarter and delivers better results. So it's important when you're looking to foster a new inclusive culture to understand and reach out to other people that might have a different perspective than you, and because as an HR leader, we have a certain way of doing things, but taking that time and understanding that your experience in the workplace is different than everyone else's experience in the workplace. Also, inviting employees to shadow you. So a lot of people, I read this article that a lot of hiring managers think that neurodivergent individuals and disabled individuals are only good for entry-level positions. This is not the case. We should have more actually neurodivergent and disabled employees and people are going to university more and getting more educated. And so it's important to make sure. So for example, you have an HR assistant or an HR intern for the summer, and they're interested in moving up in HR, or they want to learn more about what you do and really take an interest. Make sure that you allow them to shadow you, that allow you to ask you questions. Have them join meetings and discussions that they normally wouldn't have exposure to. And in this regard, so if, for example, if a neurodivergent or a disabled employee wants to shadow you, sometimes they need it. So say if you're inviting them to a meeting, it's important to debrief after the meeting, but it's also important to give them a clear expectation of what's going to happen at the meeting. This is who's attending, whatever they need to be successful at this meeting, and really understand what your role is in this meeting. It's important to prep them beforehand and give them a little rundown of what to expect. Purposely seek out other perspectives. Look for different perspectives whenever you're doing a job. And in HR, if you're trying to build an inclusive culture, your first priority should be to get different perspectives. And you can do it informally or formally. It's up to you, depending on the culture that you already have in your organization. And understanding where the gaps are currently. And ask people for their ideas and their inputs to expand your way of not doing things and understanding how they do things versus how you do things. Also, building a culture of inclusion it's not an easy process. It takes clear actions and it only starts with you demonstrating these inclusive leadership behaviors. Lastly, evaluate your culture towards neurodiverse and disabled employees by asking them how they feel about the culture. So why wouldn't you just ask how your disabled and neurodivergent employees feel about the culture? If you feel like there's a barrier that they have, or you as an HR see the issues that in your workplace and you don't think it's that inclusive to these individuals, take a step back and create a diversity and inclusion survey with a focus on accessibility and neurodiversity, or find a template, or depending on, I don't know what your other diversity strategies are and how well your other diversity is, you might want to do a whole diversity and inclusion survey to see where across all boards how inclusive you're being to all diverse members, or just focus on neurodiversity and disabled aspects and accessibility aspects. There's also lots of templates online, or even have a DEI consultant come in and work with your HR team to help create a survey, then analyze the findings and see where your company is currently doing well and where your company needs to improve. After this, you need to start researching and also taking the data from those surveys and understanding, okay, how can we move forward? And then have a section, the employees give suggestions of how they think they can make it more inclusive, because no one but your employees know how to actually make it more inclusive for your specific work environment, and listen to what they have to say. Now I'm going to talk about being an ally. So being an ally is a huge part of being a leader. Being an ally is so important because it allows you and the employee to feel more comfortable and feel like you actually care about them in the workplace. Being an ally is being a leader, because not just for neurodiversity and neurodivergent and disabled employees, but for all employees to feel more included in the workplace. So with regards to disability and neurodivergency, educate yourself on disability issues. So start looking up what disability issues exist in the workplace, like barriers to meetings, barriers to getting to work, things that concern disabled individuals in the workplace. respect individual experiences. So a lot of people think if they know one person with autism, for example, or ADHD or anything under the umbrella, that they know all people with autism. This is not the case. You have to really understand that everyone has unique experiences based on their various other factors. And also, another thing is that every day, so everything's a spectrum, and some people sometimes they need more support, and sometimes they need less support, and that's valid. That as a human, every day we need more support. So if something happens in our personal life, that they say to leave your personal life at home, but it's it's still going to impact you in some way. So understanding that one day you're going to need a little more time to do something, and some other days you don't need that much time. So understanding that everyone's experiences are different. Make your content more accessible. So this starts with making your website more accessible. There's a lot of good companies out there right now about digital accessibility and making sure your content is accessible. And then even within that, making sure that if you have documents for your employees or anything, that it's accessible and that everyone can access it to the best of their ability, and accommodating them if they need accommodation, and make sure that if they need PDFs to be a certain way, if they need the way they access information a different way, make sure that's all accessible. Also, asking questions is a huge way to be an ally. So just ask and make friends with disabled people. I know there's a stigma, and before people like, well, don't stare at people with disabilities and all these things, and don't ask them questions. And that's sometimes people with disabilities don't want to answer your questions, and that's valid too. What's important is that if they want to share and they're willing to share what their lived experiences and to educate you, then listen to them and ask them those questions and have those open dialogues. Advocate along disabled people. So some mistakes that employers make is that they start advocating without educating themselves on what exactly is impacting disabled people. They're just assuming what they need to advocate for and advocating accordingly. It's important that you advocate along disabled people. It's important that you understand the importance of accessibility. So why is it important that everyone has access to the same documents, even if they need it in a different way? Why is it important to address accessibility in the workplace? How is it going to make you a stronger organization and move forward? Also, use the language they want you to use. A lot of people think it's important. It's important to use people first language, so like people with autism, a person with autism, or people with disabilities, or a person with a disability. However, this is not the case. So if someone says, I identify as autistic, I identify as disabled, listen to the language they're reclaiming and use it accordingly. Also, instead of saying special needs, which when you say special needs, it's a term that's been used for years. However, it implies that they have different needs that aren't human. And that's not the case. We're all human. We all have needs. And so that's outdated. And also, as well as differently abled. I actually read an article that said we're all differently abled. What does that even mean? And it's just another way of people say it's just another way of saying that we're all different. And that's okay. Next slide. So I want to thank you guys so much for your time. I'm actually going to share my screen in a second. And I have PDF fact sheets about how to accommodate in the workplace and how to foster a more inclusive culture within the workplace. So if you're interested, I'm going to show you that now. And if you're interested, you can send me an email. Let me just pull it up.
I wanted to thank you, Sydney. Thank you so much for your informative talk. I learned so much from my takeaways during this. So I guess as you're loading your PDF, would you be okay with answering a couple of questions as well?
Yes.
Oh, the PDF.
Yes, here's the PDF.
All right. We can work with this together, Sydney. So if people want to grab the PDF form from you, they can email you, right?
Yes.
And I'll put your email in the chat. But you can also find you in the search function, people function, and Air Meet.
Mm-hmm. So yes, so this is one of the fact sheets I have created to help accommodate in the workplace. I saw that a lot of employers, they think there's so many steps, complicated steps to accommodate, and it's broken down into 5 easy steps that you can start doing today. And then I also have one other PDF about how to foster an inclusive culture and how to be more accessible. One second. And here's the other one. So how to be more accessible and how to be more inclusive. So if you're interested in those, send me an email and I'll be sure to send it to you. And now we can do the Q&A.
Awesome. So there was a question in the Q&A, so I'll show that on stage. All right. And I'm not sure if you'd like for us to read it or if you'd like to go on stage, just let me know in the chat. But I'll read it really quickly. When should a prospective candidate disclose their disability if they do not need accommodation through the recruitment process but may need help later?
Yes, so a lot of employers right now are saying we can have accommodation for you throughout the entire recruitment process. And that is a great question, Samia. Thank you. So if you don't need accommodation during the recruitment process, but you need accommodation. So let's say, for example, when you get the offer letter and you're having those conversations with the employer, you feel like you're going to need accommodation from the first day, then you can disclose that you have a disability and this is the accommodation you need. And then also with that, you don't even have to directly disclose yet what disability you do have. You can just ask for the accommodation you need and what's going to make you be most successful. So you want to do it before you start the first day of work, because if you need it for the first day of work, then you have to accommodate. They have to accommodate and have all these plans in order to accommodate your needs. So it's important to do it after you get the offer letter, or when they call you saying they have an offer for you, because then there's also the company I work with, we have the accommodation policy and having the accommodation process laid out in the form, and you begin the process of how to accommodate you in the workplace before you start your first day. Does that answer your question?
All right, Samina, thank you so much. Did you want to come on stage to share more about your question, Samina, or was Sydney's answer okay for you? Like enlightening for you? Okay, I think we're good here. And okay. I think there were some other questions as well. Hold on. So one of the questions that I thought of when I was listening to your talk was, what are some like real life strategies we can apply in the remote workplace to support neurodiversity?
Yes, so it's important to demonstrate empathy remotely, and by this, it's just doing check-ins. I don't know if you guys use this, but we use Slack. And that's a good tool to just quickly check on the person. And if you see, for example, like you have a meeting with an individual or they need to disclose something to you about how they're feeling that day and that disability is impacting them more. So having that empathy and reaching out to them every day or when you think is needed and being like, hey, are you okay? And having that support system in place and having that channel of communication open. Also asking about people's needs and acknowledging them and tailoring actions accordingly. So again, it's more focused on disability and neurodivergent individuals, but everyone has different needs and accommodations that they need every day. So for example, for example, you have anxiety and you have a big meeting and presentation coming up for your boss and the employee discloses to you hey, I'm feeling kind of anxious right now, and I don't know if I can do the presentation, and talk them through it, ask them why they feel that way, or and have put supports in place, like, hey, and give other suggestions, like, and ask if you can, and see if the person is just for today you're anxious, or is it are you anxious for the presentation in general? What way can I best support you? Do you not want to do the presentation? Do you just want to work? And even, or before that, get to the point, and the person is close to you when you ask them to do a presentation, and they say, I'm too anxious to do presentation, but I want to work on the presentation. Accommodate them, have them work on the presentation, but don't have them present the presentation, or have them do other aspects of the presentation, as well as creating a space for diverse perspectives and encouraging participation. So having that, you could have a channel in Slack or have an email communication where you don't talk about direct work tasks, but you talk about how you're feeling in the workplace, how, and allow them to bring their ideas forward, and have that one-on-one space, in that little space where they feel, so that, for example, on Slack, you can create an ideas channel, so people can just share their ideas there in a casual environment, as well as make time for structured remote team building and networking. So it's important because we're so busy with tasks and job duties, and we have a lot of duties to be done from home and remotely. But it's important to be take a break from that and just work on team building and making people feel included in the team and feel like they can share their voice, and having those fun activities and great engagement, as well as attend virtual workshops and conferences on these events and on these topics, because there's so many topics and webinars right now on accessibility and neurodiversity in the workplace. And then there's also a lot of people that are passionate about it and want to talk about it. So reach out to them, see if you can bring that into the workplace, because that shows you that you really care about neurodiversity and disability in the workplace, and that you're trying to make a difference and you want to make that change.
All right. Thank you so much, Cindy, for sharing, because those are a lot of tips that we all take away and apply right now to our own workplaces. And I hear you. I think the running theme in what you've been saying is just asking questions, being open, having that one-on-one discussion.
Yeah, ask those questions. And then it goes back to also your neurodiverse and disabled employees know what they need to have the best support. So just ask them. A lot of people, this is what I say all the time, but a lot of people think that they have to know how to accommodate people before they accommodate the individual. But people know how they want to be accommodated and how they want to be best supported. Even if they're not neurodivergent and disabled, you know what you need to be like, hey, this is the leadership style I work best under. This is the tools I need to succeed today. And that's just having that open conversation and that open dialogue.
All right. Thank you so much, Sydney, for offering all of your knowledge to us today. We really appreciate it.